Dreams are often described as random or meaningless, but from a neuroscience perspective, they reflect highly structured patterns of brain activity. During sleep, particularly REM sleep, the brain does not simply shut down. In many ways, it becomes more internally active, generating complex sequences of neural firing that are organized and purposeful, even if they feel chaotic from a subjective point of view. One of the defining features of REM sleep is a distinct neurochemical environment. Levels of norepinephrine, a neuromodulator associated with alertness and stress, drop to very low levels. At the same time, acetylcholine remains relatively elevated, supporting cortical activation and communication between brain regions. This combination creates a state where the brain is active but not driven by external sensory input or immediate survival demands. Instead, it turns inward, processing internally generated information. Electrically, the brain during REM sleep shows activity patterns that resemble wakefulness, especially in areas involved in perception and memory. However, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logical reasoning and executive control, is less active. This imbalance contributes to the unusual, often illogical narratives experienced in dreams. The brain is generating sequences of images and events without the same level of top-down control that normally organizes thought during waking. At the same time, structures involved in memory and emotion, such as the hippocampus and amygdala, remain active. The hippocampus is critical for encoding and retrieving memories, while the amygdala processes emotional significance. Their activity during dreaming suggests that the brain is revisiting past experiences and evaluating their emotional content. This is not random replay, but a selective process where certain patterns are reactivated based on relevance, intensity, or recent exposure. Another important feature is the disconnection from external input. Sensory signals from the outside world are largely gated during REM sleep, meaning the brain is not focused on responding to the environment. This allows internal processes to unfold without interruption. In addition, motor output is suppressed, preventing the body from acting out dreams. This creates a safe state where the brain can simulate experiences without physical consequences. The structured nature of dreaming becomes more apparent when you consider how consistent certain themes and patterns can be. People often dream about recent events, unresolved problems, or emotionally significant experiences. These are not random selections. They reflect the brain prioritizing information that may need further processing or integration. Timing also matters. REM sleep occurs in cycles throughout the night, with longer and more intense periods occurring later in the sleep cycle. This suggests that the brain allocates specific windows for this type of processing, reinforcing the idea that dreaming serves a functional role rather than being a byproduct of inactivity. Even though dreams can feel fragmented or bizarre, they are built from recognizable elements, faces, places, emotions, and scenarios drawn from real experiences. The brain is recombining these elements in ways that reflect underlying neural processes. The apparent randomness is often a result of reduced executive control, not a lack of structure. Understanding dreams as structured brain activity shifts the perspective from something passive and meaningless to something active and potentially useful. It highlights that the brain is continuously working, even during sleep, to process information and maintain internal balance. One of the central functions of dreaming is tied to how the brain processes and stabilizes memories through a mechanism often referred to as replay. Throughout the day, your brain is constantly taking in information, sensory details, conversations, skills, and emotional experiences. These inputs are initially encoded in a temporary and somewhat fragile form, particularly within structures like the hippocampus. For those memories to become stable and accessible over time, they need to be reorganized and integrated into broader networks across the cortex. During sleep, and especially during REM and certain stages of non-REM sleep, the brain reactivates patterns of neural activity that occurred during waking. This replay is not a perfect reproduction of events, but a selective reactivation of key elements. Neurons that fired together during an experience tend to fire together again during sleep, reinforcing the connections between them. This process strengthens the neural pathways associated with important information, making those memories more durable. Dreaming appears to be the subjective experience of this replay process. As the brain reactivates fragments of memory, it often combines them with other related fragments, creating narratives that can feel unusual or disjointed. For example, a recent conversation might blend with an older memory, or a completely different setting. This is because the brain is not trying to recreate reality. It is extracting patterns and relationships between pieces of information. This recombination is critical for learning. By linking new information with existing knowledge, the brain builds more efficient and flexible representations. Instead of storing isolated events, it organizes information into networks that can be accessed and applied in different contexts. This is why sleep, and dreaming in particular, is associated with improved performance on tasks that require understanding patterns or solving problems. Another important aspect is that not all memories are treated equally. The brain prioritizes certain experiences for replay based on factors like emotional intensity, novelty, and relevance to current goals. Emotionally charged events, for example, are more likely to be reactivated because they carry important signals about survival or personal significance. Similarly, information that you have been actively trying to learn or focus on is more likely to be processed during sleep. The timing of this replay is also structured. Early in the night, during deep non-REM sleep, the brain tends to focus more on stabilizing factual and declarative memories. Later in the night, during REM sleep, there is more integration and abstraction, where memories are connected and reorganized. This progression supports both the retention of specific details and the extraction of broader meaning. Disruption of sleep can interfere with this entire process. If replay is interrupted or shortened, memories may remain fragile and less integrated, leading to poorer recall and reduced learning efficiency. This is why consistent, high-quality sleep is essential for cognitive performance. The process also highlights why reviewing or engaging with information before sleep can be effective. When you focus on specific material, you increase the likelihood that those neural patterns will be tagged for replay. This gives the brain a clearer signal about what should be strengthened during sleep. In this way, dreaming is not just a passive reflection of memory, but an active process that shapes what you retain, how you understand it, and how effectively you can use it in the future. One of the most important functions of dreaming is its role in emotional processing, which is tightly linked to the unique neurochemical state of the brain during REM sleep. During waking life, emotionally intense experiences are often encoded alongside strong physiological responses, elevated heart rate, increased alertness, and heightened stress signaling. These responses are driven in part by neuromodulators like norepinephrine, which amplifies attention and emotional intensity. While this is useful in the moment, it can make certain memories feel overwhelming or intrusive if not properly regulated. During REM sleep, the brain shifts into a very different state. Levels of norepinephrine drop to nearly zero, while other systems, such as acetylcholine, remain active. This creates a condition where memories can be reactivated without the same level of stress-related signaling that was present during the original experience. In other words, the brain can revisit emotional content in a calmer internal environment. At the same time, brain regions involved in emotion, particularly the amygdala, remain active. The amygdala is responsible for detecting and encoding emotional significance, especially in relation to threat or reward. Its activity during dreaming suggests that the brain is not avoiding emotional material, but actively engaging with it. However, because the stress-related neurochemistry is reduced, the emotional charge of these memories can be gradually adjusted. This process is sometimes described as decoupling emotion from memory. The factual components of an experience, what happened, where it occurred, can remain intact, while the intensity of the associated emotional response is reduced over repeated cycles of sleep. This allows the brain to retain useful information without being overwhelmed by it. For example, a stressful event may still be remembered clearly, but it becomes less distressing over time as it is processed during dreaming. The structure of dreams reflects this process. Emotional themes are often exaggerated, symbolic, or blended with unrelated elements. This is likely because the brain is not simply replaying events, but exploring different associations and contexts. By doing so, it may be testing and reshaping how emotional responses are linked to specific memories. This flexible recombination allows for a broader range of interpretations and can help update how experiences are understood. Another important aspect is repetition. Emotionally significant experiences often appear in multiple dreams across different nights. Each reactivation provides another opportunity for the brain to adjust the emotional weighting of that memory. Over time, this repeated exposure in a low-stress state can reduce reactivity, making the memory easier to manage during waking life. If this process is disrupted, emotional regulation can be impaired. Reduced or fragmented REM sleep has been associated with increased emotional reactivity, heightened anxiety, and difficulty coping with stress. Without sufficient opportunity to process emotional experiences during sleep, the brain may carry forward higher levels of unresolved emotional intensity. This mechanism also explains why certain experiences feel processed after a good night's sleep. The brain has had time to revisit and reorganize emotional content, leading to a shift in how those experiences are perceived. What felt overwhelming before may feel more manageable, not because the memory has disappeared, but because its emotional impact has been recalibrated. Forgetting is often viewed as a failure of memory, but from a neuroscience perspective, it is an essential and highly active process. The brain is constantly taking in far more information than it can efficiently store, and without mechanisms to filter and remove less important data, neural circuits would become overloaded. Sleep, and particularly the processes associated with dreaming, plays a key role in this selective forgetting. One of the primary mechanisms involved is sometimes referred to as synaptic downscaling. During waking life, as you learn and experience new things, connections between neurons, synapses, are strengthened. This widespread strengthening increases overall neural activity and energy demand. If this continued unchecked, it would reduce the brain's ability to distinguish between important and unimportant signals. During sleep, the brain globally reduces the strength of many of these connections, effectively resetting the system while preserving the relative differences between stronger and weaker synapses. This means that connections that were only weakly activated or not repeatedly reinforced are more likely to be reduced or eliminated. In contrast, connections associated with important or frequently used information are maintained or even strengthened relative to others. The result is a more efficient network where meaningful patterns stand out more clearly and irrelevant details are filtered away. Dreaming appears to reflect part of this process. As the brain reactivates certain patterns during sleep, it is not only strengthening some connections, but also allowing others to fade. The selective nature of replay means that not all experiences are revisited equally. Information that is emotionally significant, novel, or relevant to current goals is more likely to be reactivated. Information that lacks these qualities may not be replayed as often, and over time, the associated neural connections weaken. This process is critical for cognitive flexibility. If every detail of every experience were retained with equal strength, it would become difficult to generalize or extract patterns. You would be overwhelmed with specifics and less able to form broader concepts. By selectively forgetting less important information, the brain improves its ability to identify what matters and apply that knowledge in new situations. There is also an energy component. Maintaining synaptic connections is metabolically costly. By pruning unnecessary connections, the brain conserves energy and maintains efficiency. This is especially important given the high energy demands of neural tissue. Sleep provides a state where this maintenance can occur without interference from ongoing sensory input and active behavior. Another aspect of selective forgetting is that it helps reduce interference between memories. When similar pieces of information are stored, they can compete with each other during retrieval. Weakening less relevant or redundant connections reduces this interference, making it easier to access the most useful information when needed. The experience of dreaming, with its shifting and sometimes fragmented content, may reflect the brain testing which associations remain strong and which can be let go. Elements that are repeatedly integrated into dream narratives are more likely to persist, while others gradually disappear from conscious recall. This process also explains why not all learning translates into long-term memory. Without reinforcement and relevance, newly formed connections are more likely to be downscaled during sleep. What remains is a refined version of your experiences, shaped not only by what you choose to remember, but also by what the brain actively decides to forget. One of the more fascinating aspects of dreaming is its role in creative recombination, where the brain takes elements from different experiences and merges them in novel ways. This process is not random. It reflects how the brain organizes and restructures information to extract patterns, generate insights, and explore possibilities that are not immediately obvious during waking thought. During REM sleep, the brain is highly active, particularly in regions involved in memory, emotion, and perception. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for logical reasoning, constraint, and goal-directed thinking, is less active. This creates a unique state where the brain is free to form connections without the usual filters that restrict associations during waking life. As a result, ideas and memories that would normally remain separate can be combined more easily. This recombination draws from a wide range of stored information. Recent experiences, older memories, emotional themes, and even abstract concepts can all be integrated into dream content. For example, a person you saw earlier in the day might appear in a completely different setting tied to a memory from years ago. While this may feel strange, it reflects the brain linking pieces of information that share underlying features or emotional significance. This process is closely related to how learning and insight occur. When the brain combines different elements, it can reveal relationships that were not previously recognized. These new connections can lead to what feels like sudden understanding or creative breakthroughs. In some cases, solutions to problems that seem difficult during waking life can emerge after sleep, not because the brain was consciously working on them, but because it was reorganizing the relevant information in a more flexible way. The absence of strict logical control during dreaming allows for a broader search of possible associations. During waking, the brain often follows well-established pathways, focusing on efficiency and accuracy. In contrast, during dreaming, the brain explores less obvious connections, including those that might initially seem irrelevant. This expanded search space increases the likelihood of finding novel combinations that can later be recognized as useful. Emotion also plays a role in guiding this recombination. Memories and ideas with strong emotional significance are more likely to be included and reworked. This means that the brain is not just combining information randomly, but prioritizing content that has meaning or importance. The resulting dream narratives often reflect this, with emotionally charged or personally relevant themes appearing more prominently. Another important aspect is that this process can help generalize learning. Instead of storing information as isolated events, the brain integrates it into broader frameworks. By mixing elements from different contexts, it extracts patterns that can be applied more widely. This supports flexible thinking and problem solving, allowing you to adapt knowledge to new situations. The creative recombinations seen in dreams also explains why they can feel symbolic or abstract. The brain is not trying to produce a literal representation of reality, but rather a functional one that captures relationships between ideas. These representations may not always be immediately understandable, but they reflect underlying processes that support learning and adaptation. Over time, this repeated recombination helps refine how information is organized in the brain. It strengthens useful connections while allowing less relevant ones to fade, contributing to both creativity and efficiency in thinking. Although dreams can feel spontaneous and outside of conscious control, they are strongly influenced by what you expose your brain to during waking life. The content you focus on, the problems you engage with, and the emotional states you experience all shape the patterns of neural activity that are later reprocessed during sleep. In this way, you can indirectly guide dreaming by controlling the inputs that your brain receives before sleep. Throughout the day, experiences are encoded as patterns of neural activity across different brain regions. Some of these patterns are tagged as more important based on factors like attention, repetition, novelty, and emotional intensity. When you deliberately focus on something, such as learning a concept, practicing a skill, or thinking through a problem, you increase the likelihood that the associated neural circuits will be prioritized for replay during sleep. This tagging process is a key mechanism through which waking behavior influences dreaming. The period just before sleep is particularly important. As you transition from wakefulness to sleep, the brain remains sensitive to recent inputs. Reviewing material, reflecting on specific ideas, or even setting an intention to think about a certain topic can bias which neural patterns are activated later during dreaming. This does not guarantee that you will dream about a specific subject, but it increases the probability that related elements will be included in the brain's processing. Emotional salience also plays a major role. Experiences that carry strong emotional weight are more likely to be revisited during dreams because they signal importance to the brain. This means that your emotional state before sleep can influence the tone and content of your dreams. For example, unresolved stress or anxiety may lead to dreams that reflect those themes, while positive or meaningful experiences may shape dreams in a different direction. Repetition strengthens this effect. When you repeatedly engage with the same material over multiple days, you reinforce the associated neural circuits. This makes it more likely that those circuits will be reactivated during sleep, contributing to both memory consolidation and the recombination processes that occur in dreams. This is why consistent study or practice tends to be more effective than cramming. It aligns better with how the brain processes information over time. There is also an attentional component. When you direct your focus towards specific types of information, you are essentially telling the brain what to prioritize. Distraction or divided attention reduces the strength of encoding, making it less likely that those experiences will be processed later. In contrast, focused engagement creates stronger neural patterns that are more likely to be selected for replay and integration. The environment and routines around sleep can further support this process. Reducing exposure to highly stimulating or distracting inputs right before sleep helps the brain maintain clarity about what has been recently prioritized. This can make the transition into sleep more conducive to targeted processing rather than random or fragmented activation. Importantly, this influence is indirect. You are not controlling dreams in a precise or deterministic way, but rather shaping probabilities. The brain still organizes and processes information according to its own internal rules, combining and modifying inputs in ways that support learning and adaptation. Over time, consistently guiding your inputs, what you learn, think about, and emotionally engage with, can influence not only the content of your dreams, but also the effectiveness of sleep in reinforcing useful information and letting go of what is less relevant. Although dreams can feel spontaneous and outside of conscious control, they are strongly influenced by what you expose your brain to during waking life. The content you focus on, the problems you engage with, and the emotional states you experience all shape the patterns of neural activity that are later reprocessed during sleep. In this way, you can indirectly guide dreaming by controlling the inputs that your brain receives before sleep. Throughout the day, experiences are encoded as patterns of neural activity across different brain regions. Some of these patterns are tagged as more important based on factors like attention, repetition, novelty, and emotional intensity. When you deliberately focus on something, such as learning a concept, practicing a skill, or thinking through a problem, you increase the likelihood that the associated neural circuits will be prioritized for replay during sleep. This tagging process is a key mechanism through which waking behavior influences dreaming. The period just before sleep is particularly important. As you transition from wakefulness to sleep, the brain remains sensitive to recent inputs. Reviewing material, reflecting on specific ideas, or even setting an intention to think about a certain topic can bias which neural patterns are activated later during dreaming. This does not guarantee that you will dream about a specific subject, but it increases the probability that related elements will be included in the brain's processing. Emotional salience also plays a major role. Experiences that carry strong emotional weight are more likely to be revisited during dreams because they signal importance to the brain. This means that your emotional state before sleep can influence the tone and content of your dreams. For example, unresolved stress or anxiety may lead to dreams that reflect those themes, while positive or meaningful experiences may shape dreams in a different direction. Repetition strengthens this effect. When you repeatedly engage with the same material over multiple days, you reinforce the associated neural circuits. This makes it more likely that those circuits will be reactivated during sleep, contributing to both memory consolidation and the recombination processes that occur in dreams. This is why consistent study or practice tends to be more effective than cramming. It aligns better with how the brain processes information over time. There is also an attentional component. When you direct your focus towards specific types of information, you are essentially telling the brain what to prioritize. Distraction or divided attention reduces the strength of encoding, making it less likely that those experiences will be processed later. In contrast, focused engagement creates stronger neural patterns that are more likely to be selected for replay and integration. The environment and routines around sleep can further support this process. Reducing exposure to highly stimulating or distracting inputs right before sleep helps the brain maintain clarity about what has been recently prioritized. This can make the transition into sleep more conducive to targeted processing rather than random or fragmented activation. Importantly, this influence is indirect. You are not controlling dreams in a precise or deterministic way, but rather shaping probabilities. The brain still organizes and processes information according to its own internal rules, combining and modifying inputs in ways that support learning and adaptation. In practical terms, this means you can use your waking life as a lever to improve how effectively your brain learns and resets during sleep. By consistently focusing on what matters, reviewing key information, and managing your mental and emotional inputs before bed, you increase the likelihood that your brain will reinforce useful patterns and let go of unnecessary ones, making dreaming a functional extension of learning rather than a passive experience.